Ritte's new Esprit road bike is an interesting alternative to the high-end race bikes from the big brands like Specialized, Giant, Trek, etc. It's light and lively with modern touches like a universal derailleur hanger, tubeless cotton tires, and an integrated cockpit, but with some straightforward construction like a 27.2 seat post, a T47 bottom bracket, and a standard steerer and headset bearings. This video is my review on the bike after doing a few hundred miles on it in both long 4 or 5 hour rides up into the mountains and in shorter but intense group rides here in and around Boulder, Colorado. I'll tell you what I like, what I don't like, and how the Esprit compares to other bikes in the category on the market. Before we get into the details of the specific parts and weights and comparisons, let's talk about how the thing feels to ride. In a word, it's efficient. It's light and stiff and therefore gratifying to ride. How much of that is due to the torsionally stiff bike, short chain stays, the carbon frame construction, and how much can be attributed to the drivetrain? This thing's got a giant oversized pulley. It's probably a little bit of both, probably more towards the stiffer frame, but the initial feel when accelerating, whether not necessarily sprinting, but just rolling away from a stoplight or getting a little bit of speed coming out of a switchback, it just feels highly efficient. Pulling back on the handlebars, also, it just feels like all the effort you put down into the bike goes straight into the drivetrain and down to the wheels. It also feels quite plush for such a stiff bike, and that I can attribute almost entirely to the cotton Vittoria Corsa Pro tires. Those I've developed a love-hate relationship with in the few months since I first rode them back when they launched in Italy this spring. More on that in a bit, but let's talk more about the bike. I've enjoyed seeing a few PRs pop up on Strava after riding this bike. Yes, of course, riding in a group gives you a lot more oomph and speed than the bicycle itself. However, I've ridden a lot of these roads in group rides dozens and dozens of times. Again, obviously, correlation is not causation. Just because I had a quicker time here or a quicker time there doesn't mean that the tires are saving me 200 watts or the frame has reduced my drag to nothing and I'm moving like a ghost through the wind. But correlation is a thing. When I get on the bike, it feels light and stiff, and some of the data shows that it's certainly as fast as the other dozens of road bikes I've ridden on these same stretches many, many times. It's also quiet. I can argue both sides of the integrated cockpit argument for sure, but two big pluses to it. One, yes, aerodynamics, but two, the visual and auditory cleanliness of having the brake housing inside the cockpit and then down to the frame. That's a definite plus. Something you notice, the faster you go, the more cables or housing out in the wind will whistle. And so having all that tucked inside makes for a quieter bike. It also makes it easier to clean the bike. And yes, all you grumbling out there, I can hear you. Yes, it makes it harder to work on and harder sometimes to travel and pack the thing. It's all a balance, right? It's always a balance. Speaking of that integrated cockpit, you can get it in 4 stem lengths and 3 bar widths, and specify that when you order. If you don't like that, you can also just use a standard 1/8" stem. I don't know why you'd buy this bike as an integrated, one-piece thing and then switch that out, but that certainly is an option. It's not the absolute lightest bike in the world by any means. Ritte claims the medium frame, I'm riding a large, but the medium frame is 890 grams, like under 900 grams, high 800 grams. Certainly not the absolute lightest. You've got an Athos in there for like 700 gram range from Specialized. Some of the feeling of light and lively has to do with stiffness, but also where that mass sits. Even things like having the bottles lower on the frame means when you're out of the saddle, there's less weight you're feeling with the pendulum effect back and forth because it's a little bit lower. The saddle that came on here was pretty light. That did not agree with me, so I swapped it out for an also super light saddle from Cadex. They've got this new Amp model. 129 grams for this Cadex Amp saddle, which is carbon shell with carbon fiber rails integrated in the shell. I didn't swap it to save a gram here or there. I swapped it because the existing saddle had ridges I could feel when I was changing positions, and that is no bueno. So I tried this sucker out, and it does not have ridges you can feel. Some of these saddles these days are going the way of what bib makers used to do with their chamois, of having a high-tech looking chamois with a bunch of ridges in different zones, sometimes heat molded in. That might look techy, but it would often feel terrible because your butt, turns out, does not have eyes, but your butt can sense friction, and having different distinct layers or ridges is not a good thing to have in the saddle zone, whether that's on the saddle or the chamois. So just nice, smooth, even transitions in addition to the shape and your preferred type of padding. I think that's key towards an enjoyable perch for many an hour. Once I had the saddle piece dialed in, I found the bike to be good and comfortable to ride, even 4, 5, 6 hour rides. The contact points are a big part of that, right? And the cockpit I found to be quite agreeable, especially when on the different parts of the tops. In the drops, the front facing part is a little bit narrower than perhaps I would have liked. Like maybe that's more aero, but having an ovalized shape that your palm is sitting in, I feel like I'd rather have a wider, more pressure spreading contact patch than minuscule savings in aerodynamics. But not a big deal, just not perfect for me in the drops, but on the tops and on the top of the hoods, found the bar to be pretty comfortable. Saddle's obviously another contact point. Then how much give the frame / seat post has is part of it. It really goes with a 27.2 standard round post. So if you don't like this particular post, you could swap it out, or if it happens to break on the road, you can find a replacement part pretty easy. Seat post integration is something we're seeing more commonly from some of the bigger brands. It allows sculpting in terms of what they're doing with the carbon, what they're doing for aerodynamic reasons, what they're doing for comfort reasons. But one person's integrated is another person's incompatible. So while the cockpit is integrated, out back the seat post is the old 27.2 standard. Depending on the level of bike, you can either get Ritte's house brand Other, OTHR, or on the higher end, an Envy post. And lastly, in the comfort equation, the tires. 28 mil tires, which are increasingly standard on road bikes, even road race bikes, definitely add for a bit more cushion, and many argue, including those who are studying this in rolling resistance, faster. The Ritte Esprit can take up to 35 mil tires, so there's plenty of room for extra cushion if you want to go bigger. And those tire bones are connected to the wheel bones, another in-house product for Ritte. Other 40s, as the name suggests, 40 mil deep wheel, 32 external, 24 mil internal with a mini hook, so not fully hookless, but not like a big chunky hook. The wheels I found to be a good Goldilocks depth, in that you're getting some aero benefit, but they're not so deep that you're getting blown around on blustery days, of which we have had more than our fair share in Colorado this year. In the age-old weight versus aero and where that all shakes out for wheels, the answer, like so many things in cycling, is it depends. If you are Tadej Pogacar or Jonas Vingegaard and you're going uphill at 50 miles an hour, yeah, aerodynamics probably is a thing that you should stick with all the way. For those of us who are not averaging ludicrous speeds uphill, then there's a balance, right? That at some point, usually around the 5 to 6 to 7% gradient, that's where we see the tipping point between aerodynamics being the primary factor and lightweight being the primary factor for the best optimized speed situation for wheels. So all that to say, a 40 mil depth, in addition to feeling good when it's windy, also is a good Goldilocks compromise for fast on the flats and still light on the climbs. Speaking of weight, let's look at what these suckers are claimed at. 1330 grams. which again, for 40 mil depth wheels, quite competitive. That's lighter than an NV SES 3.4, which interestingly comes on the top end spec bikes here. It's lighter than a Zip 303, etc. So quite light, and in my experience of a few hundred miles, feels good and stiff, and then certainly have had no maintenance issues with the star ratchet hub or anything else on these wheels. So really with the wheels, it seems like you've got everything but a blingy brand name, which is kind of the story of the bike itself. I would venture to guess you have not heard of the other brand. I certainly had not until speaking with the good folks at Ritte. You might not have heard of the name Ritte itself. So that just brings up an interesting thing of how much of your interest in a bike or a bike part is the quantitative elements that you can measure, like weights or aerodynamics or price, and how much is just the emotional brand appeal, right? Varies for different folks. I like how the bike looks. I'll say that. I like the naked raw carbon with the glittery silver Ritte decal. I have to confess, there's still a little part of me in my squirrel brain that appreciates a more Gucci label on wheels. Could I feel the difference? I don't know, but there's still that part of me like, I want to have like some sort of cool bling on a carbon wheel. Where do you net out? Speaking of things you can measure, price. Certainly can measure that and compare apples to apples. And here, Ritte is in line with the big brands, which is curious. So bike comes in two basic levels, a Force/Ultegra model for $7,900, or a little bit more if you get a power meter, $8,300 with a power meter. Or the second option is a SRAM Red / Shimano Dura-Ace option, and that's just shy of $12,000 without a power meter, and just shy of $12,400 with a power meter. That is right in line with what we're seeing from other brands where you can go to a bike shop and try the thing out before you buy. For instance, just read some prices here from my research. A Giant TCR Advanced SL disc, that's almost the exact price you're looking at for a similar spec. Canyon Ultimate, you can get consumer direct. You can't go into the shop and test the thing out unless you happen to live in Carlsbad, California, or in Germany near the showroom there. Canyon Ultimate CFR, their absolute tippity top end bike, you can get that for just under $10,000 for SRAM Red or Shimano Dura-Ace. Also, you can get an Ultimate CF SLX 9 with Di2 Dura-Ace and a power meter for $7,000. So again, like $5,000 less than this Ritte for similar equip you can get for $5,000 less. Ultegra Di2 bike you can get with a power meter for $5,500. Ritte is selling through a few shops, but for the most part, for most people in most places in the world, you're going to buy this thing consumer direct, and there's a few ways to do that. Through Cycle is a delivery service that can drop off a fully built bike. That's a cool option. That is how I picked up this bike. It was built almost perfectly, except the front derailleur was not tight. So the first ride, the front shifting was off, and it took me a bit to figure out, oh, the bolt holding the derailleur on just wasn't all the way tight. So it wasn't a long fix, but for someone who may have not been able to sleuth that out, I think that would have been a frustrating, experience. Talked to Ritte about this, and they said if a consumer bought this bike through part of that service is helping you get your pedals put on and getting set up and fit on the bike before they leave. So if there are any issues, they can adjust those for you before they leave. So it's a step closer towards a bike shop of having a professional build the bike, hand you the bike, have some interaction before they leave you with it, but it's still not exactly the same as working with a shop that's going to be there not just the day you buy it, but the next day and the next week, etc. So you can go back in and get any adjustments that you may need. The ride is supported this year by Feedback Sports, which makes the stands and tools and scales that I use all the time. Feedback has a new website you should go check out, and they're running a sale to promote it. If you use the code THERIDE25, you can save 25% on your whole order. They've got some cool new stuff in addition to the old stalwarts. The Pro Mechanic HD stand is this super beefy stand that can handle up to heavy e-bikes. Besides the stands and the scales, you've got tool sets like the Team Edition toolkit that contains many of the tools I use every day. Allen keys, pedal wrenches, cassette pliers, pedal wrench, screwdrivers, utility pick, cutters. There's a new range click, adjustable torque wrench just came out where you can adjust the torque and use a number of different attachments. And there's a piece that I've been using for travel quite a bit, the Reflex fixed torque. Similar, but smaller, travel friendly, and it's just set to a 5 Newton meter torque, whereas the adjustable one adjusts. Head on over to feedbacksports.com and plug in the code THERIDE25 to save yourself 25%. Thank you, Feedback Sports, for supporting me this year, and thank you for checking them out. Okay, what I loved, what I hated. Start with tires, which is a bit of both. I gave you some of this rant already. It's got the cotton casing here, which you may recognize from such feature films as the Specialized Turbo Cotton. Vittoria makes those. Neither company is out there shouting that from the rooftops, but that's where it comes from. Specialized delivers a lot of great product, but does not necessarily produce much or any of it. Vittoria makes that turbo cotton, which is a clincher, not tubeless. This is tubeless and the first, to my knowledge, of a cotton casing tubeless. As I said, it feels fantastic. It also will flat just by looking at the thing. Funny, at least that's been my experience. I've had a number of punctures, most of which seal up with sealants. The bike has got a lot of splatters on the fork, the down tube, and the back, and probably the riders behind me from, you know, little nicks that would start spraying sealant and then seal up after losing a little bit of air pressure. Most of flats, yes, are just dumb luck, but at some point you start to see trends, and I certainly managed to nick the front and rear of this tire, I don't know, 5-6 times in the course of less than 1,000 miles. And that's also been roughly my luck with the Specialized Turbo Cottons, which also feel fantastic, which test quite well in rolling resistance tests. Very fast, very supple, very nice feeling, and not bomb-proof. So that's kind of where we net out, where I net out with these Vittoria Corsa Pro Control tires. The bars, the other bars, is a little bit closer to love. I love how stiff they feel when pulling back on them when climbing or sprinting, but how comfortable they are when just sitting there with your hands more casually perched when JRA, just riding along. The little skinnier ovalized bit in the drops, not quite my favorite, but overall good setup, and the reach of 80 mil drop of 125, -7 degree angle of the stem. That all feels like good straight up the middle road race geometry. The integration I'm a fan of visually. I believe in science. I believe aerodynamics is a thing. And as long as you're not having to travel with a bike on a regular basis, the fact that the brake hoses are internal, not really that big of a deal. I don't like the saddle. I don't like the fact that the price is the same as a bike where you can walk into a shop and get the professional service before, during, and after the sale. Bottom line, it's a light and lively bike. It is gratifying to ride. In my humble opinion, I think it looks sweet, particularly the frame with the integrated cockpit up front. My question here, and in general, is how important is branding to you? Do you like the concept of a cool boutique brand like Ritte? Do you find it strange that there's a brand you've never heard of like other making high-end parts? Do you think Specialized and Trek are cool? Do you think they're too corporate and big box? And how much of that really affects the day-to-day ride? These are questions for me to pose, for you to answer, but I find it's good to have options so we can at least consider these things. As always, I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you subscribing. And whether you're riding a Specialized or a Trek that everyone's heard of, or a Ritte with other parts that very few people may have heard of, make sure you enjoy the ride.